I work at a motel. I think skinwalkers are staying here. If you're ever driving down Route 106 in Michigan and you see a sign for the Greenbrier Motel, you better just keep on driving. Because there is something terribly wrong here, and the last thing I would want is for more people to die. I started working at the Greenbrier Motel a week ago. It wasn't a dream job by any standards. Night shift at the front desk, checking people in and out, doing some inventory in the back. I liked the peace and quiet, though. As a little rundown motel on a stretch of isolated highway in Michigan, it gave me a lot of time to read and play computer games on the clock. It also helped that the owner, Frank, didn't seem to care I was a high school dropout with a rap sheet. But on the very first day, I felt that something was terribly off. For one, there was the smell. When the wind shifted, the entire parking lot smelled like rotting meat. I ran to close the windows, but even then I could still smell it, seeping in through the HVAC system. The motel is surrounded by deep woods, so I figured maybe we were near the kill grounds of some animal. Or maybe it was just the endless roadkill of deer and possums on the highway. Either way, it was unsettling. And definitely not enjoyable. The other thing that struck me as odd were the guests' rooms. Some of them didn't have windows, and it seemed like that was intentional. I could see the lines in the paint, the seams outlining where windows had once been. When I asked Frank, he told me that some of the guests asked for windowless rooms, that they were in high demand. He didn't elaborate, and honestly, I was a little scared to press him on it. Things went from strange to downright creepy, however, as soon as Frank left. As I got set up at my desk, a woman walked into the room. She was in her 40s, maybe, with black hair and very pale skin. As soon as she stepped inside, she locked the door behind her. "Frank left, right?" she asked me. "Yeah," I replied. Who are you?" She introduced herself as Matilda. She'd been working here for a decade, cleaning the motel rooms after the guests checked out. After a few minutes of small talk, she suddenly came up to the counter and lowered her voice. "I want to make sure you're safe around here," she said, glancing back towards the door nervously. "So I need you to listen to me." "Okay?" My heart dropped. Okay? "Whatever you do, don't ask questions. Just check people in, check them out, and mind your own business. And then, you'll be fine." My stomach did a little flip. Okay, so it was that kind of motel. Illegal business of multiple kinds, probably, all being conducted under our dilapidated roof. What if the police come? Will I be arrested, too? She gave me a blank stare. The police? Say they find evidence of illegal activity in one of the rooms. Will that get me in trouble? I already have shoplifting on my record and can't. She shook her head. "Don't worry about the police. Just don't ask questions. And don't make eye contact or look at their faces for too long." I swallowed. They don't want witnesses. They don't want me to be able to pick them out of a lineup. I thought, okay. I won't ask questions, and I won't look at them for too long. Got it. She smiled at me. You have nothing to worry about. As it turned out, though, I had quite a lot to worry about. That night, I checked in 3 people. They were almost like caricatures, a big, strong guy in sunglasses that looked like he'd stepped right out of The Godfather. A woman dressed to the nines, wearing a more makeup than a clown. A skinny young guy in a hoodie that smelled of something chemical and strange. But I listened to Matilda. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even ask the questions I should have been asking, like when Hoodie Guy gave me an ID that was clearly fake. Don't ask questions and you'll be fine. I kept repeating that to myself. And I kept my eyes glued to the computer screen, never even glancing up at them. When it hit midnight, I assumed the rest of the night would be smooth sailing. On this lonely stretch of highway, it was unlikely anyone else would check in. I pulled up Minesweeper and played some music on my phone. My peace and quiet, however, was interrupted by the doors swinging open. At 2 a.m., I glanced up to see the guy in sunglasses, the guy who looked like he'd stepped out of The Godfather. Oh, no. I should have locked the door. I swallowed and kept my eyes glued to the computer screen as he approached. "Can I help you?" I asked, watching him in my peripheral vision. "Do you have any razors for purchase?" I froze. Razors? At 2 a.m.? I instantly got a mental image of him slashing someone up in his room. Blood all over the sheets, soaking into the carpet. No, we don't have any razors," I said, keeping my eyes on the computer screen. "Can you just check in the back, please?" I swallowed. I really didn't want to go check. As soon as I turned around, he could do anything. Pull out a gun. Tackle me. Force me into a chokehold and keep me hostage. But refusing him was just as bad, if not worse. It might make him mad. Really mad. I sat there, staring at Minesweeper on the screen, weighing my options. Paying close attention to him out of the corner of my eye. And that's when I saw it. There was something off about this guy. His sunglasses looked like they were slightly too low on his face. Like the eyes they were covering weren't in quite the right place. And not only that, but I couldn't see his eyebrows poking above the frames or the contours of his brow ridge. Everything above the glasses was perfectly flat and smooth. Like he had no eye sockets at all. "Can you check in the back, please?" he asked again, his voice taking on an annoyed tone. "Why, yes. Sure." I sprung out of the seat and ducked into the back storage area. I quickly glanced over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following me, but he wasn't. I had half a mind to just stay there, hiding out in the back storage room, until I heard his voice calling me. "Did you find them?" He sounded angry. Approaching furious. Thankfully, I did find a few packaged razors next to some spare toothbrushes and soap we kept. I grabbed them and handed them over, keeping my eyes trained on the floor. "Thank you," he said, sounding pleased. And that was it. He turned around and left. As soon as the door shut, I ran over and locked it. I closed the blinds and sat back down at the front desk, my heart hammering in my chest. All I could picture were the strange contours of his face. And as I sat there, I realized something. All three guests that I'd checked in since the start of my shift, the Godfather guy, the makeup woman, the hoodie guy, had something covering their face or head. I mean, I wasn't exaggerating about the woman having enough makeup for a clown. She was wearing foundation so thick that it cracked around the corners of her eyes and lips, and wore false eyelashes so long they gave the appearance of spider legs. And hoodie guy had kept his head pulled so tightly over his head that his ears and hair weren't visible. It was like they all had something to hide. Morning couldn't come soon enough. As soon as the day shift workers arrived, I got the hell out of there. I floored it back to my house and slept for a long time, my sleep plagued with nightmares of faceless people and spidery eyelashes. Then it was time to go back to the motel for night number 2. Thankfully, it was a quieter night. Although the vacancy sign glowed brightly in the darkness, no one checked in during my shift. They must have all come earlier, during the day shift. I locked the door, sat down with a cup of coffee, and enjoyed getting some reading done in the quiet. Unfortunately, the quiet didn't last long. Around midnight, I heard a loud slam from outside. I threw my book down and ran over to the window. The door to room 16 was wide open. I looked around. Nobody appeared to be outside, the parking lot, and the sidewalk were empty. The room itself was dark, none of the lights were on. I walked over to the computer and looked up the room. To my surprise, no one had booked it for tonight. Should I go out and close the door? I hesitated. It was late. There was no one around, except for the occasional passing car. If someone had broken into that room and then attacked me, there would be no one to hear me scream. So I kept the door locked tight and accessed the security camera feed instead. As I rewound it, I saw what happened. The door had opened, and then a woman had walked out of it. I couldn't see her face, just her long dark hair. She then disappeared into room 22. I checked room 22 on the computer and saw it was booked to a woman named Cassandra Johnson. I frowned. Looked like Cassandra might be going into our vacant rooms and possibly stealing stuff. Matilda must have forgotten to lock up the room after she cleaned it. I sighed, opened the door, and began walking towards the open room. I thought of knocking on room 22, but then thought better of it. Keep your nose out of other people's business. I'd just lock up room 16 and go back to the lobby like a good little employee. I walked towards to the open room. But as soon as I got close, a horrible smell wafted out of the room. Like something rotting, decaying. My stomach turned. What did Cassandra do in there? Throw up? Stash all her garbage in there? I reached into the darkness of the room. Bracing myself, I flicked on the light. The room looked normal. The bed was made. The carpet was clean. But the smell had only intensified. I pinched my nose as I glanced around, starting to feel nauseous. And then I saw it. There was something on the carpet, just barely poking out from the other side of the bed. What is that? It was tan and folded over itself, like a beige sheet or pillowcase had been bunched up on the other side. But all our sheets were white. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Hello? I called out. Nothing. The smell got even worse as I approached the bed. Nausea washed over me. I forced myself to keep going, pinching my nose, swallowing down the urge to throw up. I peered over the side of the bed and froze. There was a pile of beige, slightly translucent material folded over itself on the other side. But I instantly recognized certain shapes attached to it. Awfully familiar shapes. Like 5 fingers, resembling a glove made of skin, poking out from under one of the folds. It looked like someone had shed their skin. I stepped back, my legs shaking underneath me. No. There's no way. It can't be. I backed away, towards the door, my throat dry. Because it didn't make sense. It didn't even make sense with a horrible crime. There wasn't any blood on it. It hadn't been cut off someone. It was like a snake skin, clean and perfect, holding the shape of its wearer like a ghost. I ran out of the room and saw, walking towards me down the sidewalk, the woman from room 22. Strands of her dark, straight hair hung over her face. But I could tell, through her hair, that there was something wrong with her face. Her eyes, her lips, were in slightly the wrong position. She strode towards me, fast, her shoes clicking on the pavement. I didn't want to find out what she'd do if she caught me. I whipped around and ran as fast as I could. I could hear her behind me, but I forced myself to go faster and faster until I was inside the lobby. I clicked the lock shut and collapsed in the back room where she couldn't see me. That's when the whistling started. Just outside the door, I could hear her whistling. The source of the sound shifted as she circled the lobby area, looking for a way in. I heard it at the door, then at the back, then through the side windows. then back at the front door. This went on for an hour. Finally, the whistling faded. But I didn't move. I stayed there, huddled in the back storage room, until dawn broke. As soon as the day shift arrived, I booked it out of there as fast as I could. I wanted to quit. With everything I am, I wanted to just walk away. But I needed the money. I already knew how hard it was finding a job with a rap sheet. It was either go back to the job or face eviction. So I went back. When I got on shift, though, I pulled Matilda aside and told her what I'd seen. I asked her again and again if my life was in danger. Asked her what the hell was going on here. If other people were in danger, too. I promise you, as long as you mind your own business, you'll be safe. So that's what I did. I minded my own business. And for the next few days, nothing of note happened. Sure, there were a few people who checked in that were wearing hats or sunglasses or extra makeup, but I just tried to avoid eye contact with them. Tried to keep my head down and my nose out of other people's business. But then came the night of November 14th. It was raining that night. The rain came down in sheets, and every so often, I heard a peal of thunder shake the windows. I wasn't expecting anyone to come in that night, as I hadn't seen that many cars driving by on the highway. The rain seemed to keep everybody in. But then I heard a knock. When I looked up, I saw a man staring in the window. A chill ran down my spine. He was wearing a hoodie that hid his head and kept his face mostly in shadow. And he was rather aggressively banging on the window, like he was in a hurry. I grabbed the mace I kept under the counter and slipped it into my pocket. Then I approached the window. "Do you have any vacancies?" he asked in a low voice, barely audible above the pounding rain. The vacancy sign glowed brightly behind him. There's no way he could have missed it. "Yeah. Come on in," I said, unlocking the door with one hand and gripping the mace in my pocket with the other. He stepped inside. Rain dripped off his jacket and onto the floor. I barely glanced at him, turning around and walking back around the counter. Then I sat down at the computer, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. In my peripheral vision, I could see him, leaning over the counter. His face only about a foot or two from mine. So close that I could smell the stale, mothball odor coming off his clothes. So close I could hear drops of water plopping onto the counter from his sleeve. "Can you go faster?" he asked, his voice raspy in his throat. "Sorry, sir, I'm going fast as I can," I replied, my heart starting to pound. It's an old computer. My fingers slipped on the mouse as I rushed to click the buttons. "I don't have all day," he growled, looming even closer to me. I wanted to look at him. My eyes were itching to glance up at the man that was 6 inches from my face. But I forced myself to stare at the screen. Whatever the hell was going on here, I was not going to be a witness. I was not going to look up and find myself face to face with a Smith & Wesson. "Your name?" I asked. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I froze. I needed a name to book the room. That's all. But maybe you wouldn't see it that way. Maybe I wasn't supposed to ask for names. Maybe that was part of Frank's understanding with certain guests. Thankfully, nothing happened. After a second of hesitation, he replied, "Daniel Jones." The name struck me as fake. Common first name, common last name. But who even cared at this point? I typed his name into the system and completed the booking process. He paid for the room in cash, which was another unnerving detail, but I tried not to worry about it. I turned my back and took a key off the hook. "Room 7, I said, handing it to him. He thanked me, and then waited by the door. I waited for a minute. Then 2. But he didn't leave. Do you need something? I asked, careful not to make eye contact. Can you escort me to my room? Oh, hell no. There was no way I could go out there. In the middle of the night. With this creepy guy. That was like a death sentence. I glanced out the window and spotted his car, a beat-up sedan, in one of the nearby parking spaces. The murder scenario played out in my head. Shoves me into the hotel room. Kills me. Sticks my body in the trunk. Throws it in the middle of the woods. Or maybe worse. Maybe my skin would end up crumpled on the floor of one of the rooms. Maybe he'd take my form, or turn me into something that sheds its skin like a snake. That has eyes too low on its face. Or no eye sockets at all. And the longer I looked at him, in the corner of my eye, the more I noticed how unsavory he looked. There were smears of dirt on his sleeves and on the hem of his pants. Like he's been digging a grave, the voice in my head added. His face, half hidden in shadow, was sunken and gaunt. His jaw was covered in gray stubble, and his teeth were a horrible shade of grayish yellow. Can't you just go yourself? I have something that I, need to do here. My boss is going to be mad. You can take 2 minutes to walk me to my room, damn it. I sat there in stunned silence. He sounded furious. My heart pounded in my ears. Okay, I said, finally. My fingers curled around the mace in my pocket, and then I joined him by the door. I'll walk you to your room. He didn't thank me. He just grabbed the door and swung it open, nearly letting it swing back in my face. I stepped out into the pouring rain with him. The parking lot was a lake, and our feet sloshed loudly through the water. The cold water seeped through my sneakers, and I shivered. I followed the man to his car, staying a good 15 feet away. He popped the trunk, and I held my breath, but thankfully, there was only a duffel bag inside. He hoisted it on his shoulder and started for room 7. I followed him at a distance, staying several feet away, watching him fidget with the key. You got a lot of other people staying here right now? He asked, as he slid the key into the lock. Some, I replied. Not great weather for it. Not really. The storm's supposed to clear tomorrow. It'll be good weather then. Wow, this is taking a while, I thought to myself. That's when I looked down at his hands, and noticed that he wasn't really trying to get into his room. He was just inserting the key, pausing, and then pulling it out. Over and over again. He was stalling for time. He was keeping me here, on purpose. I looked up from his hands, just in time to see him staring at me. His blue eyes were intense, studying me. I wanted to run away. Every inch of me was screaming to get out of there. But the guy had 6 inches on me, and was really thin. He'd probably catch me in seconds. I was never much of a runner. I slipped my hand in my pocket, curling my fingers around the mace. Do you need help getting into your room? I asked. He shook his head. I'm going to go back to the front desk, I said, taking a step back. As soon as I said that, he froze. His eyes widened as he stared at me. Slowly, he shook his head, his lips stretching into a grimace that revealed his yellow teeth. Don't go, he growled, his voice barely audible above the rain. Stay exactly where you are. I leapt into action. I whipped the mace out of my pocket and held it in front of me, pointing it right at him. Don't get any closer. My finger hovered over the trigger. And then I heard it. Someone was whistling. Behind me, somewhere in the rain. The song cut through the pattering raindrops like a knife. It was the same eerie tune that woman had whistled a few days ago. I'm sorry, the man said quietly, his blue eyes locked on mine. But I needed bait. I stared at him. My brain couldn't even process what he was saying. Bait? I took a stumbling step back. The whistling grew louder. I whipped around. Through the rain, I could see someone walking through the parking lot, barely lit by the flickering street lamp. The mace fell from my hands and clattered to the ground. Then I turned and ran as fast as I could towards the lobby. The whistling stopped, and then I could hear loud, splashing footsteps, growing louder with every second behind me. I swung the door open, slammed it shut, and turned the lock. I pulled the blinds down over the window. Panting, I parted them with my fingertips and peered out into the night. There was a woman standing in the parking lot. The same woman I had seen a week ago. Her hair and clothes were drenched with rain, but she was smiling, this big, lopsided grin that sent chills down my spine. And her eyes were strange, wide and wild, incredibly light blue. In the darkness, it almost looked like she didn't have irises at all. Just two pinholes for pupils, staring right at my door. No. She took a step forward. I ran over to my desk, grabbed my cell phone, started dialing 911. Come on. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at the Greenbrier Motel and there's this guy, and this weird woman. Thump. I was cut off by a loud thump nearby. I ran to the window and peered out. The man who'd booked room 7 was running towards the woman. He was holding something up in the air, a short dagger, gleaming silver in the rain. He's attacking her. I screamed into the phone. The woman's face changed. Her features twisted, her grin crept up to her eyes. Her arms crackled and stretched. She blinked, and her eyes turned pure white. Her body twisted unnaturally at the waist, so that she was facing the man. With fast, jolted movements, she leapt at him. Within seconds, he was dead. She stood on all fours above him, her knees bent the wrong way, her fingers far too long. With another horrible crackling sound, her neck stretched out 2 feet long, twisting in serpentine. And then she looked at me. I leapt away from the window with a scream. What's happening? The operator asked me. Sir, please, tell me what's happening. I opened my mouth, tried to speak, but only a squeaking sound came out. By the time I made it back over to the window, the woman was standing there, looking down at her kill. She looked normal. Then she stepped over his body and walked towards the rooms. To my horror, she pulled out a key and opened room 22. Then she disappeared inside. The police arrived a few minutes later. In strings of gibberish, I begged them to check room 22. That something horrible was lurking inside. But then they knocked on the door. A completely normal-looking woman opened it. I watched from the lobby. I couldn't hear that much of their conversation over the pouring rain, but they weren't arresting her, weren't accusing her. They seemed to just be having a friendly conversation, asking her what she'd seen. Then they thanked her and came back to me. We'll need to see the security tapes from tonight, please, the officer said, in an accusing tone. But when I showed them the tapes, they got quiet. One of the officers made a call to someone, saying something about an infestation. The other 2 officers ushered me out into the lobby, their faces grim. They told me not to leave as they talked among themselves in hushed voices in the corner of the room. Then they approached. You didn't see anything tonight, the tall man said, leaning in close. You got that? But what about? Listen to me very carefully, he interrupted, lowering his voice. You didn't see anything. Just like you never shoplifted in your life. What? You understand me? He asked. The silence stretched out between us. Yeah, I got it, I said, my voice wavering. I didn't see anything. I left the motel and never went back. I plan to never speak of what I saw. To keep my mouth shut, just like they told me to. But after losing many nights of sleep, I realized that I need to warn people. I need to warn you. I can't have another person dying because of these things, whatever they are. So, I beg you, if you're driving through Michigan and see that there's a vacancy at the Greenbrier Motel, keep driving. I witnessed something at the church near my house. I wish I hadn't. Something strange is happening at the small church near my house. I've stumbled upon some horrific things there, and I'm not sure what to do. I live in the suburbs, in a quiet area with 15 houses scattered around. Going into the city takes 40 minutes by car. I don't know any of my neighbors. I only know John, who lives closest to me. I work as a data engineer for an insurance company, but I won't bore you with the details. What matters is that it takes me 2 hours to get to work, so my days are long. I wake up at 5 a.m. and don't get home until 8 p.m. I usually don't do anything once I get home because I am too exhausted. Only on the weekends do I have some time for myself, which I use to work on my photography skills. Last Wednesday, I went to a restaurant with my colleagues for a team outing after work. I still had to work a 9 to 5 that day, so I felt drained before it even started. Socializing is already tough for me as an introvert, and keeping up with the group was exhausting. I mostly stuck to polite conversation, as I'm not sure what kind of conversations I'm supposed to have with colleagues that aren't work-related. We stayed at the restaurant until 9 p.m., and since it was in the opposite direction of my house, I had a 2.5-hour drive ahead of me to get home. As I was driving back, I hit another delay, a crash on the highway that added another 30 minutes. I was frustrated, knowing I'd barely have any time to rest before the next workday. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I finally got onto the quiet suburban roads near my house. It was pitch black, and even with my headlights on, I had to be extra careful because wildlife could jump out at any moment. It once happened to me that a deer jumped in front of my car and just stood there. I barely managed to stop in time, but ever since then, I've been extra careful. When I was about 10 minutes from home, I passed by the small church. It always seemed a bit eerie to me. It's never really used except for the occasional funeral. The building seems to be on the older side, so I assume it's kept around for its historical value. The church looked particularly sinister that night. Despite my tiredness, I saw an opportunity to take a good picture for my photography portfolio. I stopped the car and took a few photos, then went back inside to review them. In one of the photos, I noticed something. After adding some filters to the photo to enhance the quality, I saw a bike and a person sitting on a bench near the church. It wasn't visible in the other pictures, probably because of the angle and the darkness. It was strange for someone to be at the church that late, so I looked back at the bench from my car, but I could not see the person sitting there. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out. I got out of the car and walked toward the church. The bike was still there, but there was no sign of the person. Then, I heard a noise coming from inside the church. Why would someone be inside at this hour? Looking back, my tiredness had clouded my judgment as I decided to investigate. I walked up to one of the windows and peered inside. Instead of seeing the main hall, I saw a small side room. I couldn't get a view of the main area, so I quietly made my way to the front door and opened it. As soon as I did, I could hear chanting. I moved further in, hoping to hear what they were saying. I found myself in a small hallway that led to the room I had seen earlier and another door that opened to the main hall. The chanting was coming from there. I peeked inside, and what I saw made my stomach turn. 6 people were standing in a circle, chanting in front of the altar. I recognized one of them as my neighbor, John. He's always been a down-to-earth guy. I could not find a reasonable explanation for why I found him in a situation like this. In the middle of the circle was a young girl, tied up with a piece of cloth in her mouth, presumably to stop her from screaming. The chanting continued, and that's when a seventh person entered the room, holding a staff. He must have been a leader because the others immediately turned toward him as he approached the altar. Tonight, we will live. The world is against our practices. Therefore, we shall not engage. But sacrifices must be made. Not for us, but for him. Fearless leader, accept our offering. Bless us with your guidance, your wisdom, and riches. I realized I had walked into some kind of cult ritual. The group resumed chanting as the leader approached the girl. After they finished, each of them cut their arm with a knife, letting the blood drip onto her. Please accept our offering and bless us with your guidance, wisdom, and riches. Before I could fully grasp what was happening, the leader plunged the knife into the girl's stomach. Without thinking, I screamed, "No," which I instantly regretted. Their heads turned toward me. One of them started running toward me, and I bolted out of there as fast as I could. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and started the engine just as the man tried to open the door. He stared at me with a big, twisted smile as I sped away. I called the police as soon as I got home, explaining what I had witnessed, but they believed I was prank calling them. I didn't sleep at all that night. The man who chased me saw my face. John knows who I am. They'll find me. This morning, I found a letter in front of my door. You are invited to celebrate the church's 350-year anniversary. Please help me. There is something wrong with my town. There is something wrong with my town ********. For the past 6 months, I've been spiraling deeper into a realization that horrifies me. I've uncovered evidence that my entire life has been a lie, but the biggest concern is that something far more sinister is happening, and I'm at a complete loss for what to do next. About 6 months ago, I was visiting my friend's house, which is located next to mine. Both of us being homeschooled, having each other to talk to is a relief, because living in a rural town, there wasn't really anyone else our age to connect with. We ended up spending the afternoon watching TV, flipping through the few channels our remote town could get. Since his parents were away, we could do anything we wanted. Suddenly, my friend suggested that he would go downstairs to the kitchen to grab some snacks. I was relieved, since I really needed to use the bathroom but was too shy to ask. As a quiet, homeschooled kid, I always hesitated to ask for anything, even from those I considered close friends. We both got up from my friend's bed and walked toward the hallway, where we ended up splitting up. He was heading towards the kitchen, and I was going to the bathroom. After finishing up, I stepped out and, on my way back to the bedroom, I noticed something strange. The door at the end of the hallway was half open. I'd visited my friend's house for about 4 years at that point and had never seen that door open before, nor any door, for that matter. My teenage curiosity piqued, and so did I. With adrenaline flooding my veins, I approached the door, knowing I shouldn't be snooping around, but the urge was impossible to resist. As I reached the door, I pushed it open, expecting to see an office or maybe a bedroom. What I found confused me. The room was completely empty. Backing away slowly, I carefully left the door just as I had found it and returned to my friend's room, waiting patiently for his return. I had already decided not to mention my discovery to him, knowing full well that I shouldn't have been snooping in the first place. My friend returned, having an unsettling look painted across his face. "Were you in that room?" he asked, his voice low and trembling. "I wasn't," I replied, trying to shake off the sense of dread creeping in. He sat next to me, his movements awkward and jerky, like reality had fractured. There was something unnatural about the way he carried himself, as if he were a puppet. Were you in that room? He repeated, flipping through channels, as if searching for something he couldn't name. Man, I wasn't in the room, I insisted, my heart racing. In an instant his head snapped toward me, eyes wide, pupils dilated. Were you in that room? The words came out in a rush, tumbling from his lips like a chant. Dude, you're freaking me out. What's wrong with you? I shot back, the unease bubbling over into irritation. But he didn't hear me. Were you in that room? Were you in that room? Were you in that room? His voice grew louder and more frantic, each repetition a jarring reminder of my own unsettling discovery. I could feel my pulse quickening, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. It was like he was pulling me into a trap, and snaring me in his obsession with that empty room. I tried to turn away, to focus on anything else, but his gaze locked onto mine, unyielding. It was as if he was trying to read my thoughts, to pull the truth from my mind. Stop it! I shouted, my voice breaking the spell. What's going on? But he just kept staring, his lips moving soundlessly, trapped in a loop that I couldn't escape. Good night, he suddenly said, turning the TV off and laying down. The hours passed, and eventually, my friend fell asleep. I was staying over at his house that night, trying to calm down and go to sleep by thinking that he was just messing around. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about that empty room and what had happened afterwards. There was something about it that pulled me in to investigate, like a magnet. What I do next is what gets me into the situation I'm in now. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my friend, and left the bedroom. I went back to that room, but nothing seemed different. Still, something didn't feel right. I decided to check around the rest of the house, letting only the moonlight from outside guide me. I moved from room to room, opening each door one by one, and discovered that every single room was empty. The only furnished rooms were the kitchen, the living room, the upstairs bedroom, and the bathroom. Even his supposed parents' room was completely bare. Now, I wasn't just confused, I was overwhelmed by a growing sense of unease. It was as if the house was designed so only the rooms someone could visit were furnished. I hurried back to bed, eventually falling asleep and waking up early the next morning. Before my friend even woke, I quietly left his house, leaving a note with a flimsy excuse for my early departure, and headed back home. Sitting at my desk, staring blankly at the wall in front of me, it hit me like a wave. 15 years of blocked memories came flooding back. My heart nearly stopped as a terrifying thought crept into my mind. What if my house was the same? My parents had always forbidden me from entering any rooms except the kitchen, living room, bathroom, and my bedroom. I knew I had to find the strength to check the rest of the house. But that was easier said than done. The last time my parents caught me trying to sneak into their bedroom, they revealed a side of themselves I never knew existed, a side that, even now, a decade later, still haunts me. I stepped out of my room and made my way toward my parents' bedroom. My heart raced as I took a deep breath and turned the handle, bracing myself for the worst. The room was empty. After the initial shock, the realization hit me: these houses aren't real. They're constructed like video game levels, just enough detail where it's needed, but empty and hollow where no one is supposed to go. I stumbled backwards, falling to the floor, and crawled back to my bedroom and shutting the door, staying there the entire day, trying to process what I had just uncovered. As night fell, I decided to try one last thing, hoping the issue was confined to my friend's house and mine. I quietly climbed out of my window, but as I dropped to the ground, I sliced my leg in the process. Ignoring the pain, I moved toward a neighbor's house. Unlike that night at my friend's place, the moonlight was hidden behind thick clouds, making it difficult for me to see. I snuck into the backyard and crept toward a window. Peeking inside, I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black, but then a violent crack of thunder lit up the sky, giving me just enough light to glimpse the Woods family. All 5 of them, including their 6-month-old baby, were standing there, in the dark, completely motionless. No TV, no lights, nothing. Just standing, frozen in place. You can image yourself being in a pitch-black room, doing nothing, not even breathing. That's what I saw in those brief seconds, before the darkness swallowed them up again. Gathering myself, I moved closer to the glass, desperate for another look. Just then, another crack of thunder split the sky, and in that flash of light, I saw Carol Wood's rotten, blue, smiling face, pressed up against the glass, staring directly at me. My lungs expelled all remaining air from them as I started to run towards my house. The skies cracked open and bled water. I opened the door, climbed up the stairs. While my damaged leg was generating an excruciating pain, I skipped past my room and ran straight for the attic, where I'm currently writing this from. It all makes sense now, why my town isn't on any maps, why I'm homeschooled, why we never visit other people, why we never go into public buildings, and why I'm locked out of half my own house. None of these things exist. But why? Am I even real? As I'm writing this, bleeding out, I know it won't be long before I'm found, either by my bloody trail or the open front door behind me. I'm hoping you're real because I'm all alone and freezing. And for the love of God, if such entity exists, I hope by the time I'm found by whatever these creature actors are, I'll be dead. As I look around, the attic is empty. I'm freezing. Every other person at this party sees and hears a man named Lucas, but I don't. You might be shouting, they're just pranking you, dude. That was what I thought when I first arrived. 1 hour later, I'm boxed in an in-suite with nothing at my disposal but weak phone reception and weaker ideas. I'll make this post brief, as I very much doubt I have a lot of time before the bathroom door parts with the frame. Before the formless man makes his way in here. I've already seen him do things that defy explanation. I'm praying that one of you knows how to save me. Please. Aston. Jack joyously announced, greeting me at the door with open arms. He was the only person I knew at the party, but most of the faces in that common room were familiar. I joined a tightly packed cluster of students by the kitchen counter. A circle of 10 people. Once Jack and I had joined the group, 10 people to my eyes, anyway. I know that because I counted each of us again, and again. I wanted to ensure that I hadn't lost my mind after Jack introduced an invisible 11th person wedged between Alexandra and Tegan. And that's Lucas, he said. Still, after 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, I'd forgotten about my friend's gesture towards the empty spot, dismissed it as an odd moment. And I summoned the courage to make conversation with Tegan. So why did you choose law? I asked her. Tegan smiled. Overbearing parents. Dad said I'd be putting my brain to waste if I were to take journalism. But I'm not planning on becoming a lawyer, so I call this a bigger waste of time. Shit, I said. That sucks. She shrugged. What about you? I asked the other girl. Alex answered, well, unlike Teagues, I do want to be a lawyer, but... my story's boring. You should hear why Lucas has taken this course. Then the other visible people in the circle all turned to face that gap between Alexandra and Tegan. Once more, I was left dumbfounded. Sure, I'm aware that we're all still young and immature. Everyone at this party is a first-year university student, after all. But we hardly know each other. This is a socializing event for freshers. A mixer. Whatever you want to call it. And I doubt that so many people would be this cruel. Why would a group of 50-something law students collaborate to torment, at random, a stranger named Aston? It's not as if I've done anything to warrant such mistreatment. We've only been studying here for a little over a month, and I've been sitting quietly in lectures. Those were the thoughts coursing through my mind in a simultaneous jumble as the other visible folk listened to a silent story. Listened and laughed as an unseen person told them something. Something that they all heard, but I did not. He cracks me up, Jack whispered to me as members of the group had a one-way conversation with air. I nodded my head slowly, unsure as to what I should say. I must have turned a ghostly shade because my friend frowned at me. "You all right, man?" he asked. "You're usually a bit cheerier than this. Too much pre-drinking before we arrived?" I cleared my throat, speaking quietly whilst the others communed with the ghosts. "I don't understand this Lucas thing. Is it a game?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Fucking hell, Aston. You really are wasted. Maybe have a glass of water or something, pal." Then all eyes in the circle turned to me. There followed an awkward pause, and Tegan started to match Jack's frown. "You okay, Aston?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. Just tired." Tegan nodded, then she and a few others turned back to the Lucas-shaped hole, the missing link in the chain. A couple of seconds later, those heads had returned to face me, as if waiting for my response. Several members of the circle were scowling at me. "Why are you ignoring him?" a student named Colin asked. "Lucas asked you a question, Aston." I tugged at my shirt, feeling my perspiring neck start to redden. The fabric was coarse, but fear was the thing that had slithered under my collar. Irritated my skin. This wasn't social anxiety. There was something entirely wrong about the room's atmosphere. I'd felt that way before Jack even introduced me to Lucas. Felt off. Even the dozens of people who weren't standing in the kitchen, weren't making conversation with Lucas, seemed to converse and chortle with an erratic, unstable energy. I caught snippets of conversations that I shouldn't have been able to hear, but every voice in the common room was unbearably loud. And a key word kept spilling out of mouths from all corners of the party. Shrine. Jack was right. I'm often an extroverted, sociable chap, but not tonight. Since showing up at this place, I've felt only the primal urge to run. "Listen, guys," I eventually said, whilst backing out of the circle. "I just need some air." As I walked towards the door, I heard a couple of students chuckle at something the invisible, inaudible man had said. "I'm sure you'll get your answer eventually," Colin whispered to thin air in an odd tone. Once outside, taking in the crisp autumnal breeze, I seriously considered going home. That was about 30 minutes ago, and I wish I'd just done it. Run for my life. That was my only chance. Things had changed when I re-entered the building. The eerie atmosphere had been polluted with something new. Everything was quiet. Not quite silent, but hushed. And the thought of a practical joke, some grand conspiracy to humiliate me, returned to my mind. The possibility that everybody was laughing at me. That would have been simpler. Just some light hazing. But I returned to find the 50 or so party guests clumped together, all facing a white wall at one side of the large room. A wall with nothing at all displayed upon it. Jack beckoned me over, before lifting a finger to his lips. "What's happening now?" I whispered. "Just watch the film," Jack quietly replied with a heavy whisper. But there was no film. Only that empty wall which had transfixed every person in the common room. Chest thumping, I noted that Alexandra, a few rows ahead, was facing the wrong way and twitching vigorously. Her nostrils bled, but that wasn't why I moaned in terror. It was the gunk oozing from her eye sockets. Not blood, but lumpy waves of pinkish gray wrapping around her eyeballs and spilling down her cheeks, as if Alexandra's very brain were itching to escape from her skull. "It's not that," I lied to myself, mouth half open in some state of paralysis. Then I began to croak, "What the fuck is?" A hand slapped against my lips, clamping them tightly together, and I turned to find Jack silencing me, though he still looked at the wall ahead. Still sobbed and sniffled with joy as he and dozens of others watched an imaginary film at the front of the room. I released a muffled gasp as I noted the trickles of gray spilling from his own orifices. "Lucas wants quiet," Jack whispered. I was too frightened to move. Too frightened of what the hypnotized members of the crowd might do to me. Frightened of my own innards fleeing from my body. Then, after half an hour of watching nothing, there came a new horror from the front of the crowd. Directly ahead of me, in the front row of the audience, two side-by-side students crumpled to the ground. Their bones shattered. Bodies imploded. The sounds of crunching and splashing. I don't know how else to describe whatever the fuck I saw. A specter scrunched their very skeletons inwards like balls of paper. And then the same happened to two audience members in the second row. The third followed. Something was flattening bodies to create a path, parting the crowd and forming a direct line towards me. "He asked you a question," Jack groaned. My friend had finally turned to face me. I ran towards the building's still ajar front door. Ran as fast as my legs would carry me, but it was no use. A gust slammed the door shut, and it wouldn't open, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how forcefully I tugged. I was trapped in the hallway. When the crunch of compressing carpet sounded behind me, I stopped rattling the door handle. Stopped and turned to see recesses forming in the carpet. The shapes of loafers or misshapen feet. These were the only physical indicators I had seen of Lucas' existence, other than the trail of crumpled corpses and the supernatural door slam. But as he walked towards me, the man's form remained unseen. His voice remained unheard. And I saw only the dozens of partygoers standing in the common room behind him, tightly huddled together, no longer watching Lucas' invisible film on the white wall. Their heads were turned to the right, were turned towards me. I dashed upstairs. There was no other way past the thing in the corridor, and no escaping out of the front door. I entered a hallway with dorm rooms on either side, and I hurriedly tried handle after handle. Stairs creaked below, one after the other. Slowly. By some miracle, I eventually found an unlocked room, so I scurried inside and locked the door behind me. That didn't feel safe enough. Of course, I locked myself in the en-suite for good measure. I don't know what Lucas asked. Don't know what Lucas might be. All I know is that he's still out there, either searching or waiting, and I need help before he finds me. I think death would be more merciful than hearing Lucas' question, than seeing his face. I thought I was alone in my apartment until I found someone else's belongings. I moved into my first apartment a few months ago, excited to finally have my own space. It was a modest one-bedroom in a quiet building, and I loved the peace it offered. I quickly settled into my routine, enjoying the independence and solitude. One night, after a long day at work, I returned home and immediately noticed something felt off. My front door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I'd forgotten in my rush to leave. I pushed the door open, calling out, "Hello," just in case I had a visitor. No response. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, and went about my evening. I noticed nothing seemed out of place, so I put it out of my mind and went to bed. The next day, I got home late again. As I entered, I felt a chill in the air and again noticed the front door was ajar. My heart raced as I cautiously stepped inside. This time, I glanced around, and my heart sank when I saw a pair of shoes by the door, shoes that didn't belong to me. I froze, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I considered calling the police but decided to check things out first. I moved silently through the living room and into the bedroom, but everything seemed untouched. The shoes were the only sign that someone had been in my apartment. I quickly went back to the door, locked it, and called my best friend, Jess. I explained what happened, and she urged me to stay somewhere else for the night. But I didn't want to seem scared, so I brushed it off and insisted I'd be fine. The next day, I took off work, still shaken. I didn't want to be alone. I spent the day at Jess's place, but by the evening, I decided to return to my apartment. I needed to confront whatever was happening. When I entered, the first thing I noticed was that the shoes were gone. I felt a mix of relief and unease. I locked the door and spent the night on edge, jumping at every sound. The following days were more of the same. Every time I came home, the door was ajar, and there were new items that didn't belong to me: a jacket, a half-empty soda can, a set of keys. Each time, I'd lock the door behind me and wonder who was entering my apartment while I was gone. I finally reached my breaking point and called my landlord. I explained the situation, and he assured me that no one had access to my apartment besides me. He suggested that I might be paranoid or imagining things. Desperate for answers, I decided to set up a camera in my living room while I was out. I left it recording and went to work, feeling a mix of dread and hope. When I got home, I rushed to check the footage. My blood ran cold as I watched. There, in the middle of my living room, was a shadowy figure, dressed in a dark hoodie, rifling through my things. I watched in horror as they casually opened my drawers, going through my personal belongings. I felt sick. I couldn't believe someone had been living in my space without me knowing. They were in and out as if it were no big deal. I immediately called the police, and they came over to check things out. When they arrived, I played them the footage, and they assured me they would investigate. They also advised me to stay with friends or family until they found out who the intruder was. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own apartment. I spent the next few nights at Jess's. The police kept me updated, but they had no leads, and I felt like I was losing my mind. Then, about a week later, I got a call from the police. They had apprehended someone, and they wanted me to come in for questioning. When I arrived at the station, I was shown a mugshot of a man I didn't recognize. They informed me that he had a history of breaking and entering. But what shook me the most was what they said next. He claimed he thought this was his apartment. He had been living in the building before I moved in, and for some reason, he believed he still had a right to enter. The officers assured me he wouldn't be able to get near me again, but I knew I'd never feel safe in that apartment again. I moved out a week later, and even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Sometimes I still hear noises at night, and I find myself looking over my shoulder more than I should. I learned that some things can hide in plain sight, and they can be scarier than any horror movie. If I turn off the light in my attic and whistle, something always whistles back, but off-key. It started when I was a kid. My parents had warned me to stay out of the attic. Too much junk up there, they'd say, waving me off whenever I asked. But of course, the more they told me to stay away, the more curious I became. So one afternoon when they were out, I climbed the narrow, creaking stairs to the attic and turned the rusty knob of the old door. The attic was just as dusty and cluttered as I'd imagined, boxes piled high, old furniture draped with moth-eaten sheets, the smell of stale wood and forgotten years filling the air. But it wasn't the mess that caught my attention. It was the silence. It was too quiet. The kind of silence that presses in on you, that makes you feel like you're not alone. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling a cold draft brush against the back of my neck, even though none of the windows were open. I don't know why I did it, but I whistled. Just a simple, soft tune, something my grandfather used to hum when I was younger. I was about to turn back toward the stairs when I heard it, a whistle. Faint, soft, but unmistakable. Only it was wrong. The sound didn't echo my tune exactly. It was off. Like someone trying to mimic what I did but failing, their tones slightly warped, distorted, like an old record played at the wrong speed. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I waited, listening, but the attic remained quiet again, just as it had before. I should have left. But I didn't. Every time I went up there after that, I'd try it again. Turn off the light, stand in the dark, and whistle. Every time, something whistled back, always off-key. Sometimes it was slow and drawn out, like whoever, or whatever, it was struggling to remember the melody. Other times it came back quickly, like a mocking echo. But it was always wrong. As I got older, I started visiting the attic less. The whistles became a story I'd tell at sleepovers, something to laugh about with friends. But I always left out the part where it truly terrified me. How every time I heard that off-key sound, a chill would crawl up my spine. How it felt like something was just beyond the edge of the dark, watching, waiting. Years passed. I grew up, moved out, went to college, started a life. I didn't think about the attic much anymore. But after my parents passed and I inherited the house, I found myself standing in front of that same door again, the old knob cool under my palm. I hadn't set foot in the attic in years. But as soon as I pushed the door open, the air hit me like a wall, stale, cold, the same sense of something lurking just beyond sight. The boxes were still there, the furniture still draped, but there was something else now. A weight to the space, like the room itself had been waiting for me. I don't know what possessed me, but I turned off the light and whistled. It came back instantly, faster than it ever had before. And this time, it wasn't just off-key. It was garbled, like too many voices trying to whistle at once, their tones clashing and scraping against each other. The sound filled the attic, growing louder and more twisted with every second. Panicked, I scrambled for the light switch, but in the dark, my fingers fumbled. The noise grew louder, closer, like it was coming from the very walls, wrapping around me. And then I felt it, something cold brushing against my arm, like a hand, but not quite. I slammed the switch on, flooding the room with light. The whistling stopped. The air went still, but I knew it was there, just beyond the light, waiting. I stood frozen in the attic, my breath coming in ragged gasps as the light flickered overhead. The sudden silence was worse than the sound of the broken whistle, worse than the garbled tones that had filled the air moments before. Because now, I could feel it. Whatever had been whistling back all those years, whatever was lurking just beyond the dark, was closer than ever. I took a hesitant step toward the door, my legs stiff with fear, when I heard it again. Not a whistle this time, but a soft, shuffling sound, like feet dragging across the floor behind me. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat, expecting to see nothing but the same old boxes, the same forgotten furniture. But something was different. The sheets that had covered the furniture were moving, barely noticeable at first, just a subtle shift, like something was breathing beneath them. One by one, they seemed to twitch, the fabric rippling as though disturbed by a breeze I couldn't feel. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out all reason. I backed up, my hand grasping blindly for the door behind me, eyes fixed on the stirring sheets. Then one of the sheets slipped off, falling to the floor in a slow, deliberate motion. I wasn't prepared for what I saw underneath. There was no chair, no box, no old forgotten relic. Instead, something crouched there, a shape, hunched and twisted, its back to me. Its body was wrong, unnaturally elongated and contorted, like a shadow stretched across a wall. The thing was pale, too pale, its skin thin and translucent, like the surface of a moth's wing. Its head hung low, obscured, but I could hear the softest sound coming from it, a wheezing breath, labored and wet, like the thing was struggling to stay alive. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to get out of that attic and never come back. But my feet stayed rooted in place, paralyzed by the grotesque sight. Then it moved. The thing's head lifted slowly, unnaturally, its neck twisting with a sickening crackle of bones. It turned toward me, but it didn't have a face. Not really. Just smooth, empty skin where its features should have been. And yet, somehow, it saw me. I knew it could see me. It let out a long, drawn-out whistle, off-key, just like before. That was all it took. The spell broke, and I lunged for the door, slamming it open and nearly tripping down the stairs in my rush. I stumbled through the hallway, my heart racing, the sound of that whistle still echoing in my head. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard it again, faint, but unmistakable. It wasn't coming from the attic this time. It was coming from behind me, from the darkened hallway that led to the rest of the house. Something was following me. I turned, my breath hitching in my chest, and saw nothing. Just the empty hallway, bathed in the dim light from the ceiling. But the sound was getting closer. The off-key whistle, garbled and wrong, growing louder with every step I took. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock, my hands shaking. The whistle was right behind me now, almost in my ear, so close I could feel the air shift. I yanked the door open and stumbled outside into the night, slamming it shut behind me. The whistling stopped. I stood there on the porch, panting, staring at the house in the darkness. Nothing moved. No sound followed me out. The attic window was still, the house eerily silent, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was over, that I had imagined the whole thing, that the house was just playing tricks on me. But as I backed away, I saw something, just for a moment, in the attic window. A figure, standing there, watching me. Its head tilted, its body twisted and wrong, a pale hand pressed against the glass. And even though I couldn't hear it, I knew it was whistling. Off-key. And now, every night, no matter where I go in the house, I hear it. That soft, broken whistle, coming from the walls, from the attic, from right behind me. It's waiting for me to turn off the lights again. And next time, I don't think I'll be able to escape. The road with no end. I would not consider myself a stupid person in any sense of the word. But I, like every person, am prone to stupid moments. That's why I decided not to go to school but instead tried to start my own business in which I would sell my own clothing brand that I was so sure was going to make me millions. It didn't last more than 4 months. Now I'm stuck in my shitty one-bedroom apartment with almost 1,000 t-shirts that I am too embarrassed to tell you what they actually say. With nothing else going on I just started looking for any job I could. But no one seemed to like the gap in the resume, so I had no offers, none, zero. Except for one. A weird sketch Indeed ad that simply said, driver. It provided no information besides that, which I honestly didn't think was possible for there to be so little on Indeed. But here it was. I assumed it was for a taxi driver or a delivery driver. I was more than confident I could do that. I'd been driving since I was 15, so how hard could it be? With really nothing else to lose, I figured at the worst they would try to rob me. Unless they wanted my clothes, they weren't getting much. When they did ask if I wanted the job, I just took it. Then I was told to meet the guy on the edge of town tonight. I asked what if I was busy, and he just responded then no job. Well, shit, guess I had no other choice. I don't know what I expected, but it definitely wasn't one dude standing next to a van. Great, I thought I'm gonna get robbed, murdered, or kidnapped. You Colton, said the shaggy-looking man with scruffy-looking brown hair and beard. He reeked of weed. Yep, that's me, I thought. Just get it over with, man. You're gonna be driving this van down that road. He pointed off to the left. Okay, where I'm driving it to? You'll know when you see it. Okay, well, you didn't really explain much about the job. I mean, I don't even know what the pay is. It ain't much, but I figure if you responded that you must really need money, I mean you come out here in the middle of the night to meet a stranger with no prior information. He was right. Well, you haven't told me much. Am I delivering drugs? Why in the hell would I post a drug-running job on fucking Indeed? That's fair. You ask one more question, I'm revoking the offer, so either take these keys and get in the van or get out of my face. Remember how I said prone to stupid decisions? This was one of them. I took the keys and got in the van. God, it smelt bad trying to grab the crank to roll down the window. But it didn't work. Oh, this is fun, I said, already regretting my choices. I checked what else was wrong with the van. The AC didn't work, but the heater did. Oh cool, I needed that in the middle of the summer. The windshield wipers worked, but no fluid. The back seat had been torn out, and there was a gross-looking mattress in their place, as well as a duffel bag. I opened to check its contents, fully expecting the drugs to be in it. But instead, it had a couple of pairs of clothes weirdly in my size, some bottled water, and snack bars, as well as a flare gun and a med kit. I went back to checking the van. You know what did work? The radio, except it was stuck on one channel that only played Christian music. No offense to anyone who follows that religion and all, but I was not listening to that. I shut off the radio and put music on my phone. I looked over at the man, but he was gone. Was I really about to do this? I told myself. I guess I was, 'cause I put the van into drive. I never got used to the feeling of driving at night, especially on country roads. As soon as you leave the city limits, you become suddenly aware of how dark nighttime is. The further you drive, the more and more the anxiety sets in. This was one road with no lines to keep you on one side. So I drove in the middle of the road until I saw someone coming on the left. Another fun thing about the road was just how bad it needed to be redone. It felt like I had to dodge a pothole every 40 feet or so. After driving for what felt like forever but turned out to only be 43 minutes, I came on my first building. A small gas station with one pump. Upon seeing it, I began wondering how the hell I was gonna fill up the van. I looked down to see the gas gauge was still on full, so that meant either this thing got pretty good gas mileage or that the gas gauge was also broken. I felt like it was the second one. I pulled over in hopes that it sold air fresheners. The smell only seemed to get worse as I drove. I was more than willing to spend what little money I had left on one. The place was extremely worn down. It only had one pump and no diesel nozzle. There were water stains running down the building, and a small breeze kept shaking a piece of the sheet metal roof. It clanked against it, and for a few short seconds I stood there listening. This was enough to annoy me, and I felt bad for any workers. I pulled the door open, but it got stuck against the concrete, and I heard someone from inside yell, "You're gonna have to shimmy through." I feel like that had to break some sort of law or safety violation. I slowly made my way through the gap. My jacket got stuck about halfway through, in which I then had to pull it off from the door, in the process ripping a small hole in the side. I looked over at the worker. He had his face buried in a book, and it seemed like he was trying to ignore me. "You sell air fresheners?" "Auto sections at the back of the store next to the medicine section." I took that as a yes. The air fresheners were $7 for one. Talk about overpricing. I knew I only had like $12 left in my account. My credit cards were maxed out and I drained my savings, so I knew I had nothing to fall back on. I checked my bank app to make sure I had the money I thought I had. To my surprise, I had more, finally something good. I had a whole $23 that I was about to completely blow at this random gas station. Still unsure if I was even getting paid for this. Why was I still driving? I mean, really, there was no job security here. I still don't even know what I'm delivering or if I'm even delivering something. Was I this desperate? Just then, like he was reading my mind, I looked down to see a text from Charlie. Wait, who was Charlie? Don't worry, kid, you're getting paid. You already have been. I went into my deposits to see that $9 had been put into my account a couple of minutes before I came to the gas station. The memo just said from Charlie. So Charlie was the man who gave me the van. I'd put that part together. I had so many questions. Where did I get his number? I mean, I don't remember exchanging numbers. I don't remember learning his name or making a contact with him. I know I didn't give him any banking info. My mind was racing. I tried texting him back, but it just said undelivered. You know what, fuck it, I was still alive and getting paid, so I'm not asking any more questions. I picked up the air freshener and went to the counter. On the counter I saw some chargers, so I picked up one that goes into the lighter port. I at least wanted my phone if I was going to be driving for God knows how long. How much for these? The man picked up the items and scanned them. $13.78. I fished in my pocket for my wallet and put my card in the reader. So you're actually real, the man behind the counter said. What is that supposed to mean? Don't worry about it, he said, shoving his face back in the book. What a weird interaction, I thought to myself on my way out. I got in the van and put up my new air fresheners. The man slapped the side of the van, startling me in the process. I opened the door to yell at him, but he cut me off. Unless you pull into somewhere with people, stay in your damn car. He walked away before elaborating. I was half tempted to follow him, but I decided against it. I was back on the road. I decided to put on a YouTube video as I was getting sick of my music. It was a video of someone explaining the Waco siege, which I had already listened to a couple of times. But I liked the YouTuber and he was slow between uploads. It got to the part where they accidentally lit the compound on fire. Just then a large creature jumped out from the darkness, bailing in front of the van. I tried to swerve so as not to hit it, but I wasn't quick enough. The van collided with the creature, smacking it with the front before it proceeded to roll over the top. I slammed on my brakes, stopping to catch my breath. My heart was pounding in my chest. I took a second breath and got out to inspect the damages on both the van and whatever I hit. The van was fine, not even a scratch on it. What a tank. The animal was not fine, it was a deer. One of its antlers broke off in the impact and its face did not seem to enjoy the asphalt. There was a small trail of blood where it skidded across the road. One of its legs was broken and was sticking in the wrong direction. Oh shit, that thing is dead. I ate my words as I heard them huff. Now I felt like it was my obligation to put it out of its misery. I found a big enough rock on the side of the road to crush its head. Shuffling over with the heavy thing, I raised it as far up as I could and dropped it. The thing came down with a splat. Blood shot up from it and splattered on my face. Welp, I said, wiping the blood off my face onto my jacket. I had done my civil duty. At least that's what I thought before the damn deer started squirming. Oh no, I had made it worse. It kicked and jumped, trying to get its head out from underneath the rock. I sat dumbfounded, trying to figure out if I should smash it with another rock or help it get the rock off. But just then it stopped. I was thankful as it finally died. I ate my words again. The thing planted its 3 working legs. As it did, the 4th leg began to crack back into place. The bones crunched multiple times, and suddenly the leg was planted with the other 3. What the? The deer lifted its head, and the rock easily fell out of its place. It sat up and stared at me. Half of its face was scrapped from the asphalt. The other half, flattened inward, there was blood and revealed bone. Its lower mouth hung halfway off, and its brain was revealed to the fresh air. In no world should it have been alive. It looked pissed in a way animals should not be able to show. The deer started its charge for me, its broken jaw swaying as it did. I turned around to make my run back toward the van, but the deer was much faster than me. I felt its remaining antler tear into my clothes and then into my back, knocking me to the ground and standing in front of me now, ready to make its second charge. I was able to roll out of the way this time. I pushed myself forward into the driver's seat and pressed the gas pedal as hard as I could. But since it was still in park, I didn't move. The deer rammed into the side, shaking the whole van. I put it into drive and peeled out of there. My adrenaline finally started to wear off, and I was very aware of my injuries, not only my back, but my knee and hands, which I scraped during my fall. Once I felt I was far enough down the road, I pulled over. Using one of the van's side mirrors, I did my best to examine my injuries. The 2 scratches on my lower back seemed to not be serious, but the puncture wound in my shoulder was bleeding really bad. I called 911 to get an ambulance, but the call wouldn't go through. It just kept failing. I knew I was going to have to drive myself to a hospital, and since I didn't want to die of blood loss, I saw one option. This was my first time doing stitches, so my solution was, well, I ended up on a WikiHow link, which as I'm typing this I realized was another stupid moment. I lacked most of the tools they use, so I had to just follow it as best I could. I took a needle and thread from the med kit and went at it. After poking the needle in my skin for the first time, I realized how fucking painful it was. I grabbed my shirt and rolled it up so I had something to bite onto, and went through several painstaking minutes of stitching. By the end of it, all I wanted was to get blackout drunk. I applied some of the first aid cream, which was for minor cuts and scrapes and scratches over my wound. Probably wouldn't help much, but better than nothing. Then slapping a gauze and some medical tape on it. If you are wondering how I stitched the back of my shoulder in the dark, side mirror and dome light from the van, I won't elaborate further. I decided my temporary sketchy job wasn't worth my life and started the 2-hour drive back towards town. I made my way around a bend in the road, and I was back in the same place I just stitched myself in. What the hell? I thought it was the same place. I flipped the van around and drove again in the opposite direction. Turned around again in the same place. I tried again and again and again, but I kept ending up in the exact same place. Even getting out a couple of times to find my blood on the road. I once again received a text. It was from Charlie. Keep driving. I texted him back asking who the hell he was and what kind of mind trick he was playing. But every text I sent didn't go through. I tried calling 911 again. I tried texting. I tried calling a friend, my old coworker, and my dad. No call or text would go through. I tried Insta, I tried Snapchat, and Facebook. Any app that would allow me to send a text. I tried even leaving comments on YouTube videos. I could use these apps, but I in no way could interact with others. Once again I received another message from Charlie. Keep driving. I accepted my defeat. I couldn't drive back toward town, and I couldn't contact anyone for help. This felt like the only option. So I got back in the van and started back on the road. I don't know what Charlie was, but he somehow was keeping me on this road, and he wasn't allowing me to talk to anyone I knew. But in a cruel twist of fate, I would later find out that I have one way to contact the outside world. Reddit. I can post as freely as I want on Reddit. I know that sounds stupid as hell. But it doesn't matter anyway, there is no way for anyone to even come help me, and I'm not revealing how to get to me. I kept driving. I'd been on the road for almost 8 hours. When I saw the diner, I pulled over and made my way inside. An older woman greeted me, sitting me down in a booth and handing me a menu. "I'll be back to take your order." There was one other customer in the place. He looked over at me before standing up from his table and making his way towards me. "Are you real or one of them?" he asked, sitting down across from me. "One of them?" "One of the things from the road." "I don't know what that means." "I can tell you're not one of them. He got you too, didn't he, that fucker Charlie?" "You know him?" "Homeless looking dude. Had you come to the edge of town in the promise of riches untold, all you had to do was drive." I didn't want to admit he tricked me with a lot less than untold riches. "Yeah, something like that. There's no way back, no way to call for help. How long have you been driving?" 8 hours, I think." "You're pretty new still. Wait, shhh, she's coming." The waitress came back to the table. "You two ready to order?" She didn't seem to care that there was someone else at the table with me now. "Cheeseburger's fine," the man said. "I'll do the same." She walked off. Like I was saying, you're pretty new still. You wouldn't believe the shit I've seen, man. Giant worms jumping over the roads. Houses that stand up from out of the ground to chase you. Hitchhikers that disintegrate into frogs when you pick them up. You know that sounds insane, right? If it was unbelievable, you wouldn't be listening still. So I'm guessing you've seen something that you're still on the fence about. I looked down at the table and whispered, "Zombie deer." I still didn't know if the deer was paranormal or just a freak of nature, but he was right, it was unexplainable at the very least. The waitress came back with our food. She stared upwards at the ceiling as if she was trying to avoid eye contact. She was listening on us, somehow I knew that. We both gobbled it up and not a word was exchanged. It wasn't until we both left the building that he spoke up again. 9 weeks. What? I've been on the road for 9 weeks. Jesus, and you have no idea how to get off, so that means I'm stuck. Yeah, you're stuck, but I got an idea. What's that? Let's go drive the road together. Safer in numbers, you know. Hell no, man, I don't know if I even believe you for one, and if I did decide you're telling the truth, what's to say you're not something the road conjured up to trick me? Yeah, you bring up a good point. Look, man, since you're probably gonna die. What the fuck, man? Let me finish. Since you're probably gonna die, I wish you the best of luck. With that, he turned around, got in his car, and sped out of the parking lot. All while I sat there trying to figure out my next move. I knew something was wrong. I knew somehow I was stuck on the road. But I knew nothing else if I was to believe that man I was gonna see some weird shit. I believed him. I don't know why, but I did. I got back in the van and I kept driving. The next fun thing I learned about the road is that the sun never comes up. In my 11 days of driving, I haven't seen the sun once. Unless I was somehow sleeping at the perfect time to miss all the sunlight, but that doesn't seem right. I never was a morning person, and I never was a people person, but damn, I was missing both of those. It makes you realize how much you took for granted: showers and hot food. I didn't get to finish my thought before the van was sent off the side of the road, causing it and me to tumble my head smack on the steering wheel, and I blacked out for a second. The van lay on its driver's side. I was hanging slightly above the window. I reached over to unbuckle myself, falling directly into the window. My whole body felt heavy, my poor stitch job showed. Blood trickled from my back and from a newly formed scratch on my forehead. I didn't have any time to worry about that. Whatever knocked the van off the road got closer now. I could hear its heavy steps moving through a nearby brush. I tried to push myself up, but new injuries began to present themselves. My ribs ached and I couldn't put any weight on my leg. I pulled myself using the armrest on the driver's side. I stood using my good leg to hold myself up, reaching for the passenger side door. But the thing dented the door inward. No matter how hard I tried, it wasn't opening. All while it got closer. I tried the window, but of course, it wouldn't roll down. An arm crashed through the front window, piercing the seat behind me. I had to duck down, forcing myself between the front seats into the back of the van. Pain shot through my body as I crawled through. The mattress had been knocked out of its place, forcing me to crawl under it. The monster was away from the window, and I could hear it scratching the car to my right. I lay in place, hoping it didn't know where I was. Its arm pierced through the side just above me. I crawled quicker towards the back window. Relief washed over me upon seeing the glass was already broken. I made my way through it, and I finally saw outside the van. Forcing myself up through the gap, feeling how ruined my leg was. I placed all my weight on my other leg, trying to move as fast as I could. I turned to see the monster's arm was still stuck inside the van. It tried harder and harder to pull its arm out. I used my opportunity to put as much distance as I could between us. The monster yanked, pulling its arm from the van before screeching into the air. It stared at me with dark black eyes and pale skin. It walked on two legs and had 4 arms. One of the arms lay flat, unmoving, the same one it pulled from the van. It clasped its incredibly sharp teeth together before running towards me. It was so much faster, there was no way I could move quickly enough. It ran with its working arms in the air as it tried to come for me. It was bloated, wearing pants and a jacket. It was human enough. I was on the road before my good leg gave out. I collapsed upon it. I turned my head to see it standing feet from me, still screaming. But it stopped right in front of me, staring at the sky. For the first time since I started on the road, the sun was rising. The monster screeched one more time before turning around and running from the road into some brush. Soon it was far from my sight. I wasn't going to wait around for it to come finish the job. I hobbled down the road for a mile or so, which in my current condition took much longer than it should have. From behind I heard the noise of what sounded like a metal clacking together. When it got closer, I was able to figure out it was a car. It came right towards me, and I prepared myself for whatever else the road was going to throw at me. The vehicle pulled over and a familiar face stepped out. The same man from the diner. "Holy shit, you're alive," he yelled at me. I said nothing back, just hobbled over to the car, opened the passenger door and got in. He nodded and got into the driver's seat. We drove for 10 minutes before either of us said a word. I saw your van and just assumed whatever did that got you. You left the diner before me. Yeah, I stopped a little down the road and waited for you to pass. I've been following you since. Eventually, we came to a clearing just a bit further down the road, and he took a moment to properly assess my injuries. He told me my stitch job was utter shit and stitched it up properly. He then took to my leg, telling me it wasn't that bad, and made me a makeshift cast out of some foam and cardboard. He placed a bandage over my forehead, and as for my ribs, there wasn't anything he could do. We took the time to finally introduce ourselves. This was Ted Villick, a 33-year-old self-proclaimed doomsday prepper. The knowledge he gained in preparation for the end times came in handy. But he was kinda, in the nicest way possible, an insane conspiracy theorist who thought our whole journey on the road was manufactured by aliens to test the limits of human capability. I didn't care about that. He could ramble about it all day. I was just happy to be around someone. For now, that's all I got. I'm stuck on this road and no one's gonna come and help me. At least I have company. I welcome any theories about what's going on here, and I'll let you all know if anything else interesting happens.